Hi lovelies and welcome, it's Funtor here. I just wanted to share some of the big questions that I had about breastfeeding and the answers that I found along the way. This might be helpful for you, so let's get into it. Is it painful? The answer is no. At least it shouldn't be. Breastfeeding isn't meant to cause pain, especially in the long term. It can, however, be painful for the first week or two while your body is adjusting to the process of breastfeeding and while you're teaching your baby how to breastfeed. So what I found is that the first 2 weeks were particularly painful because I didn't have a good latch, and the latch is really what is most important to get good feeding that is painless for the mum and very nourishing for the baby, where they can extract as much milk as possible. Does breastfeeding make your breasts different sizes? The answer is yes, it can make your breasts different sizes. The reason why this happens is because breastfeeding very much works on a supply and demand basis, and that supply and demand is based on the demand on each breast. And babies do naturally have a tendency to have a preference to a particular breast. So in the event that you were to feed primarily on one breast, then you would end up having more milk being released into that breast because there's a greater demand on that breast to produce more milk. So you might find that when it's time for your baby to feed and your breasts become full with milk, the preferred breast and the breast that is fed on more frequently becomes larger and fuller than the other breast, leaving an appearance of different sized breasts. To combat this, I very much would alternate between breasts while feeding. Your baby having a preference in which breast they feed on is completely natural and it isn't a problem. If your breasts are different sizes, it's also technically not a problem. Your baby is still being fed as much as they need to be fed. It's just aesthetically, it's nice to have some balance. Can I drink alcohol or caffeine while breastfeeding? Well, the short answer is that everything that you consume as a mother finds its way into your breast milk in varying quantities. So if you want to be cautious and you want to make sure that no caffeine and no alcohol ever makes its way into your breast milk, then you're best staying away from it. According to the NHS, the main thing to do is to make sure that if you do have a drink, you're not caring for your baby while you are intoxicated. If you do drink alcohol while you're breastfeeding, the level of alcohol that is in your breast milk is very similar to how it works in your bloodstream, meaning that your body will gradually filter out the alcohol after time has passed. So if you wait 2 to 3 hours after having a drink, you may find that the quantities of alcohol in your blood and in your breast milk will gradually decrease, which means that you don't need to pump and dump, meaning pumping right after having alcohol and throwing away that milk. You may want to rather just wait for some time to pass so that you can lower the amount of alcohol that may be in that milk and make sure that it's in a place that's safe enough to feed your baby. Similarly with caffeine, caffeine can enter your bloodstream and it can enter your breast milk also, which means that you may want to be careful about the quantities of caffeine or alcohol that you consume. I think the NHS recommends that you stick to 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day to limit the amount of caffeine that is entering your breast milk. What do I do if I need to breastfeed in public? So firstly, it's really important to know your rights. In the UK, it's completely illegal for anyone to tell you to stop breastfeeding in public. So at least you know that you have every right to breastfeed whenever your baby needs it. I'd say the biggest thing to do when you need to breastfeed in public is to try to plan ahead. So what I tend to do is try and time my day so that I can feed before I leave home, maybe feed in the car before I get to my destination, and then I try not to be out for too long so that I'm able to be in a position where I can feed my baby around the time that they get hungry. Of course, that's not always possible. Sometimes you have a very long day and you're bound to need to feed in public. So I'd say make sure you're wearing clothing that's nice and easy to feed in. You can easily bring a breast out, and you can also use a muslin cloth or buy a nursing cover, which is also an option that can make women feel very comfortable while they're feeding. For me, I tend to just like to layer up my clothing. So if I'm wearing a t-shirt or an outer shirt or a jumper, and I'll have another garment underneath, which means that while I'm feeding my baby, my clothing completely covers her mouth and my breast, so you can't actually see anything. I also try to be quite strategic about my locations. So if I'm driving around, then that's great. I've got my car that I can always use. And in the event that I don't have my car and I'm out and about, for example, in a shopping centre, then sometimes I've fed my baby in a changing room before. Many places actually do offer breastfeeding facilities, so I would recommend researching where you're going, checking. Many shopping centres will have a designated room or a lounge. Don't worry, it takes time to get comfortable and confident with feeding on the go, and it does absolutely get easier the older your baby is and the longer that you do it. Is baby getting enough milk? Now, it can be hard to know whether or not your baby is being fed enough when you're breastfeeding, since it's difficult to quantify what they're getting. However, there are lots of cues that your baby will give you to indicate whether or not they're getting enough food. So as a newborn, you don't need to worry too much about your baby being full, because they very much feed on demand. And that is the best way to make sure that your baby is having enough food, is to feed them when they're demanding for it, rather than being too rigid with a schedule. This also allows for cluster feeding and periods of time where they're demanding more food, such as when they're going through a growth spurt and they need the extra nutrition to help them grow. Your baby will often feel satisfied and naturally drop off your breast when they are full. You may find that they become very relaxed, or maybe even appear milk drunk, as people coin it. And these are signs that your baby is full and satisfied after a feed. The reason why they may not be full after a feed is if they aren't getting a deep enough latch. So once again, work on getting that latch right, and you'll be sure to make sure that your baby is full. As your baby gets older, perhaps after the 3-4 month mark, you may find that they start needing to feed on both breasts rather than just one breast. So if you've fed your baby one breast, it's always good to offer them the second breast. And if they latch on and continue feeding, then that's an indication that they're not quite full yet and they need more milk. And once they're full, they will drop off naturally, and you'll see the satisfaction in their disposition. Do your breasts leak? Yes. When breastfeeding, it is a common thing for your breasts to leak, and that leaking is caused by your letdown, which is a natural reflex where your body releases milk when it's time for your baby to feed, or when feeding begins, it starts to release milk. And particularly in the early days when your baby is a newborn or quite young, you may find that your body starts to release milk around the time that they're due to feed, or if your baby cries, for example, then your body might start to release milk. And it's actually a really interesting thing. I found that before my baby even cried for food, I would feel a surge of milk, and I would start to feel milk being released. And also, if she were crying or fussy, I would also get that feeling. So what I'd often need to do is use breast pads in all of my bras at all times, because you never know when you're going to leak, and you don't really want to be in a position where you start to leak and you're not able to change your clothing. When should I start pumping? So pumping is very much dependent on one's lifestyle, so it's quite a personal thing. The main thing to consider is to potentially delay starting pumping until after breastfeeding is established. And it usually takes 2 to 4 weeks for your body to establish breastfeeding, which means that your body has regulated the amount of milk it needs to supply to satisfy your baby's hunger needs. So after that point, then by all means, you can proceed starting to pump. What to do if I get a clogged milk duct or experience mastitis? So a clogged milk duct is when breast milk isn't fully drained from the breast and starts to harden and block the duct. And mastitis is inflammation or swelling caused by that blockage. So the two often coincide, and I have experienced it, and it can be very uncomfortable and very painful. So to avoid getting a clogged duct or mastitis, it's important to make sure that you're feeding your baby when they demand it, and you're fully draining that breast of milk. When I did have a clogged duct, the first thing I did was to pump. Feeding is a great way to get rid of a clogged duct, but when your nipples are very sore from the clogged duct or from the mastitis, you may find it more comfortable to pump. I would also massage my breasts while pumping or feeding to promote the flow of milk. A hot compress is also very effective at soothing inflammation from mastitis and helping the release of milk. I often found it quite helpful to massage my breasts in the shower, where you've got the steam and the warmth that can also help to alleviate the blockage. When should I stop breastfeeding? Whenever you are ready and your baby is ready. According to the NHS, they actually recommend that breastfeeding alongside eating solid food is optimal into the second year of your baby's life, which means that they're encouraging mothers to continue breastfeeding well into 2 years of age. And the reason for this is because breast milk is rich in lots of nutrients and antibodies, and your baby will continue to reap the benefits of that even as a toddler and as they continue to grow. Now, of course, there is a bit of a stigma breastfeeding babies, and I know that many mothers feel a bit judged when they want to breastfeed their baby beyond a year, or when their baby is more active, walking, talking, and they are a toddler. But actually, that doesn't really matter. Other people's opinions on when you should stop breastfeeding doesn't matter. What does matter is your lifestyle, what suits you, and your baby's health and nutrition. So for me, I'm going to try to keep breastfeeding as long as I can. Obviously, I'm in a fortunate position where I can be around her and I can pump comfortably. So that means I've been able to keep up my breastfeeding supply and keep on breastfeeding. But as long as it's beneficial for her, I'm going to try and continue feeding. So those are the major questions that I've had on breastfeeding throughout the journey so far, and I do hope you found that helpful. Please give this a thumbs up if you did, and drop any extra questions you have down below and I'd be happy to answer those as well. If you'd like to stick around for more videos like this one, then consider subscribing, and thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!